So I came back to St Thomas's, and there was a position in all the main centres for a person who was responsible for the student component of the staff, and there was somebody else already there, and I assumed she would carry on, and I didn't expect any change when I went there, but she just resigned from that position, and I said, well, don't be ridiculous, you're highly respected. No, she said, I'll be quite relieved. So anyway, I became the tutor, a sort of unofficial position in a way, but there it was. And I think it was assumed that I would stay on for a while, but when I became engaged, which had always been on the cards, I went to the medical superintendent-in-chief, Dr. Thompson, and I said, I'd like to tender my resignation, and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to be a farmer's wife. And he said, what a jolly good choice. I quite approve of that. You don't want to spend your life doing this sort of thing. So that was that. I think the board took a different view. They thought I had some obligation. In a way I did, because they paid half of my expenses to travel back. I took the view that I had already benefited the department in many ways. I'd made many changes in direction because I could see how very different things were in England from where they were now. Instead of England being the traditional stay at home, follow on from your traditions, that was quite the reverse. St Thomas's actually was known as the Nightingale School of Nursing because it was Florence Nightingale who came back to England and started drawing a few guidelines and so on. But it wasn't at all. They had changed completely, whereas we wore veils. They didn't have any headwear at all. We had never been allowed to sit on a patient's bed. First thing I learned when I went to learn more about post-operative treatment for chest surgery. Sit on your patient's bed, get in front of them, put your hands on their ribs, feel what's going on. Use your hands in that way to detect and to direct. Thinking more about the identification. It still had massage department at the Christchurch Hospital. I went to the superintendent, or else I did it on my own. I breached protocol quite a lot when I came back. But I learned that I had to go to the medical superintendent, and this is what Miss Roberts had emphasised was important. Deal with the medical superintendent. You are not under the nursing services. That wasn't put as baldly as all that, but it was a hangover from the Nightingale era when it was a nursing system which changed the English system of healthcare. Another thing was that in England the different disciplines had shoulder tabs or some way of differentiating. St Thomas's had one method which was very simple, the epaulets. When I went to Middlesex Hospital after that, and I was there before I had my electrical examination, because it was in two sections then, you had two examinations, and they had what was almost looked like a naval, very military epaulet, navy blue. When I brought two of them back with me, and at morning tea time, when staff were together, I said, I'm going to try and introduce this. And so they said, oh, that one. I remember Mrs Ainsworth was one. She said, that's the best one, have that naval one. So that was approved, but Mr Medical Superintendent said, anything to do with that you'll have to clear with the matron. So I went to see her, and she said, well, I think you're making a big mistake. I think you will regret it. But she said, you will lose the position of automatic respect you get when you see somebody employed with patient care. I mean, this is a big subject in itself. So I did this. I said, this is what they're doing in England. And Snowy Will, who was in charge of the department from the hospital hierarchy point of view, he said, Yes, I don't like massage department at all. And I said physical medicine or physical therapy or something. And he said, no, he said, I quite agree about the change, but I prefer this one. I forget who won out in the end. I think I'd already gone ahead and done it without his approval. I was very naive because I hadn't actually managed a partner before. I gradually learnt. It is quite apparent today when they're doing their courses in management, you know what's the proper thing to do. A natural manager, I think, or an administrator, works this out for his or herself, trial and error. When the rest of the staff saw these jolly things flashing around, they wanted to know why they didn't have them. So that started the red for dietitians and yellow for radiotherapy. He knew exactly. It was obvious. That was quite interesting. In those days, you had to have a practicing certificate to do private practice. I didn't have a practicing certificate because I worked for the hospital board. It was a different system. And a practicing certificate had a condition that you couldn't do things without a referral or some stipulation. It wasn't involved, but you had to conform and have a practicing certificate. And I thought, well, that would not be required here because there's not the need for... I didn't know this. At any rate, people got to know, I think. It was no secret that I'd been a physiotherapist, a trained physiotherapist. And they might ring up and say, well, can you give me any treatment? And I'd say, well, have you got a doctor's certificate? And I'd say, well, I can't do it, or I haven't got a practicing certificate. It became known that I was someone you could get in touch with, but for advice or where to go or what to do. I remember somebody ringing me up and saying, oh, I know. I mean, you know how if you diagnose a ruptured tendon Achilles, it feels if you've got a blow on the back of your calf, that sort of thing. And when one of my person I saw a bit of because we were on Plunket together, saying, you're telling me what happened? And I said, it sounds to me as if you've ruptured your tendon Achilles. And she told the doctor there, and the doctor said, oh, well, she knows what these symptoms are. And he was, news gets around, doesn't it? So I went along to help somebody do something. She'd had a similar thing happen to her. She wasn't recovering very well from her ability to use her calf muscles. So I went along to help her. The only thing I could think of that would help her would be a car jack. So we adapted the car jack so that we can modify and give her exercise, because I said it's no good just fiddling around like this. You've got to do it against resistance and that sort of thing, and demand. So she had a bit of a giggle about it, and I suppose that got around. I don't know. And then somebody else rang up and said, well, this person had been bedbound for years and was in this fixed position. And I think I rang up the doctor and I said, look, I'm not licensed to do this. And he said, oh, don't worry about that sort of rot. So I went along and couldn't do much at that stage. It was fixed. Did what I could, but, that got around. People make wrong conclusions sometimes. Christmas time, we used to cut up prime lamb to take to relations and so on who been associated with farming. So he was cutting up the joint, and he was cutting the joint with a tomahawk, and he had his hand holding the thing, and he sliced across his anatomical snuff box. So I saw what had happened. I rang up Lindsay McDougall, the Christchurch Hospital, and he was a very promising young registrar who used to assist Leslie Will. And I said, I did what I could. I put it up in the position. And I said, I've got to come in now, straight away. It's an emergency. He said, okay. And he arranged to have the operation thing ready and everything. So he took that referral direct from me rather than having to go through a GP and all this sort of preamble. So he made a bit of a joke of it afterwards that he took the instructions. We'd worked together, and he went over it straight in and stitched it up, and we were invited to a family gathering that night. I jolly well wouldn't go because for some reason or other I thought it wasn't appropriate that he should go out to a gathering and that nature.